Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Ruben Steele, and I'm so excited because this event has been in the making for 2 months. 2 months, and I'm so excited. We have a dynamic panel of distinguished gentlemen that are professionals, that are very knowledgeable, that will provide some valuable insight to the various topics we're going to discuss today. So do me a favor. So please like the channel if you're on Facebook or on YouTube. Share it with a friend or family member or somebody you know. You don't want to miss this conversation. It's going to be a very rich and deep conversation. And also, we want you to join the conversation. So in the chat, you can put questions, put comments, give shout outs where you're from, and just welcome to the Seabrook Men's Ministry Masterclass discussion. The title is The Mind, Man's Greatest Weapon or Destructive Foe. And so we're going to dive right into it. So welcome. Thanks for joining us and participate along the journey. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have four panelists. The first panelist, I'm actually going to drop him down because he's working on some sound issues. So I'm going to jump to the next panelist, which is Joseph Warren II. He's a licensed certified clinical social worker. He currently works for the VA and the PTSD trauma clinic, working with veterans who have experienced trauma. And so he's passionate about trauma. He's passionate about helping others. And he's here to participate with us today and share his perspectives. So welcome, Joseph. You can share a couple words if you would like.
Yeah. Hello. It's nice to meet. Well, I already know you, but it's nice to meet the live Facebook and YouTube. And I'm just excited to be here. And thank you for the invitation. So thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. Next, we have Jean Audain. He's also a LCSW, a licensed certified clinical social worker. He's a school therapist and counselor in the Baltimore City area. He has a unique gift and passion of working with the young people. He's helping them to empower them for hope and uses a strength-based perspective. He also has a private practice where he sees clients, I believe, from 12 and up. And he has a partner in his practice as well. So welcome, John. Thank you for being a part of the discussion.
Appreciate it, Ruben. I'm happy to be here with you all tonight, and I'm looking for the Lord's leading on what mental health means to us all.
Absolutely. So next up, we have a good brother from Atlanta representing the South ATL. So if anybody from the ATL, please drop in the line, or anybody down south, please drop in the chat where you're from if you're repping the ATL. But his name is Dr. Neil Grimes. So he's an LCSW social worker, and he has a doctoral in clinical social work as well. He also runs a private practice. He does counseling, life coaching, and a variety of other things. So we welcome brother Dr. Grimes, all the way from Atlanta. So thank you for being here, brother.
Of course.
All right. So we're going to add brother Ase Daniels a little later in the discussion. So, brother, before we go further, I just want to just pause and say prayer, and then we'll kind of just, dive right into it. All right. Dear God, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We invite your Holy Spirit and your presence in this discussion, that we're not just here just to talk among ourselves, but we want to talk to the wider audience and those who are listening online, or who may listen later after this is posted. So be with us, help us, guide our thoughts, our lips, be with our words, that it may reach someone in need and help somebody. In Jesus' name, amen. So the pastor gave a powerful sermon today at Seabrook. Greetings, Brother Emmanuel. All right, Brother E is in the house. And it was Prison Ministries Day, right? And a part of this sermon discussed how people are often physically free, but in mental and emotional psychological prisons, right? And the power of the mind can be very powerful. And so I remember sometime back when I was younger, maybe about 15 years or so ago, I felt like I was in my own mental prison, dealing with depression, dealing with anxiety, dealing with critical thoughts, just negative thinking. And it was just so hard to kind of get out of that prison, right? And so I want our executive producer to put up our first question, because we want to look at the impact of core beliefs, our schemas, our mindset, how that affects and impacts our emotional and mental health. So, brother, you can kind of just start us off discussing how our core beliefs affect our mental and emotional health, right? Like, how does what we believe, how we think, the patterns of thinking, how does that either kind of help us in our mental health, emotional wellness, or how does it kind of hinder or even hurt us in our mental and emotional wellness? So I'll go ahead and pitch it to Jean, just because you're from Andrews. So I went to Andrews, just picking on you, bro, just to kind of start us off.
Sure. Well, core beliefs, if you think about the whole word core, that's like the center, right? When we look at how we develop, we are first, born to our parents, and those are the first individuals that show us essentially everything that we know. They show us how to eat, they show us how to talk, they show us how to walk. And from that, and our experiences with our parents, whether positive or negative, it helps to develop our core beliefs, right? Some things that people often don't realize is that a lot of the way that we think, and we're going to use that word quite a bit tonight, a lot of the way that we think come from those who first taught us to think, who taught us to eat, to taught us to walk, you know, and sometimes our thinking is problematic, you know, and if our thinking is problematic, then most likely our feelings and how we relate to different people or relate to emotions could potentially be problematic. And if our feelings are then problematic, then our actions, right, in conclusion, are going to be problematic. So our core beliefs come from our experiences and our early stages of development, from infancy through adolescence and adulthood, and they shape and they form who we are and who we become in the world. And it starts with our thoughts, those first thoughts that we had as a young person.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I definitely can relate to that personally, and when I'm talking to my clients, kind of explaining that paradigm of like how did I get here? Like, where is this coming from? Right? Where's this coming from? So I appreciate that, John. Dr. Grimes or Joseph, anything you want to add to that or share in regards to just belief system, core beliefs, the impact on emotional, mental wellness?
Yeah, just throwing it out there. Core beliefs. There are also these statements that we tell ourselves. A real man carries his own load. I'm useless. I don't need any help. Therapy is for women. It could be anything that in your heart of hearts, like Brother Arden was saying, your core, you believe these statements to be true. And once your mind has accepted these statements as the truth, that can be a huge, huge barrier to you getting the help that you need to move past that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Joseph, something you want to say as well?
Yeah, same thing what the brothers were saying, just kind of piggyback on it. One of the things that when I work with my veterans, we have this thing that's called a common belief, or the just war belief. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. And what happens is that when people don't realize that bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, we have this idea of the Santa Claus mentality, right? And they get stuck in that. And so one of the things we have to do is try to help them get unstuck, or try to change them understand the lie or the stuckness that they're in. But I think the brothers explained it very well, this how you were raised and how you were socialized and how you were brought up. The way I was brought up is totally different compared to the way you guys were brought up, but trying to find that connection and making sure that whoever you're talking to, that you help them see the rightness in themselves. Not so much of us, but help them to see their beliefs and see where they're stuck. So yeah, just want to tap on that.
Yeah, and I often tell my clients too, like, be mindful of your thoughts. Like, so think about what you're thinking about, right? So these thoughts, we call them ants, right? Automatic negative thoughts happen so often that people are often not aware of what they're actually thinking, right? And so what Dr. Grimes said in terms of like therapies for women, or I'm useless, or what's the point of trying, or it's not going to work. I know something bad's going to happen today because it always happens. What's the point of trying, right? So these things often get reinforced because they're on this loop and this track. And you wonder why, you're feeling down. It's because maybe some of those thoughts and the belief system that has taken root, and it starts to kind of produce that emotion of feeling down or anxiety. So we got good news. So Pastor Ase Daniels is back with us. So we want to bring him on to join the conversation as well. Thank you, Pastor Daniels. He has a master's in pastoral counseling. He's currently the pastor at Tacoma Park Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Next Generation pastor. He's a speaker, author, life coach. So welcome, brother. You can say a couple of words as we kind of continue the conversation as well.
No, glad to be finally on, and I can concur and agree with everything that everyone shared earlier. And just quickly from a biblical perspective, everything is biblical, but from a scriptural, one of the scriptures that always jumps out to me is, Matt, we know this verse. Most of us that grown up in church, going to church, Matthew 22, verse 39. For 38, 39, and this is the greatest, first and greatest commandment. Y'all should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. But we never get into the second part of this verse, in verse 39, of this commandment, that the second is like to it: love your neighbor as yourself. We prioritize and we emphasize and we push and preach and teach on a regular basis loving our neighbors, which is good. But somehow we've equated loving ourselves to selfishness. And if we're selfish, then God can't use us. God is not happy with us. God is not pleased with us. So anything that falls into that category of loving ourselves, we think of it as selfish and evil and wrong. And thus therapy and counseling that we know we need in addressing our mental health. So that I always say, put yourself first so you could be exponentially more useful to God after. But we don't frame it that way. We always think it's negative. Anytime we think of ourselves, quote unquote, first, as opposed to prioritizing our self-care and mental health so that we can do exponentially more for others. That to me is where the breakdown happens, especially from a religious and a church perspective.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? Because basically you're saying, hey, I'm going to put my needs, my life, things that I need to kind of focus on a back burner, because if I put it to the front, I'm being selfish. So let's kind of just dive right in terms of just talking about men, right? And so the stigma is still out there in terms of mental health and getting therapy, right? Often hear, I'm not crazy. I'm just here to talk a little bit, but I ain't crazy though, right? Or they may feel weak if you reach out to somebody for help, right? So in your experiences, what's been some of the reasons when brothers finally get to your office, or the young men that you're seeing, John, when they start opening up? What's been the reasons that may have taken them so long, right? Like, what's kind of holding the brothers back? Is it just a stigma? Is it some other factors? Is it access? Like, why do men are kind of less likely to seek help versus women or other populations?
Well, when we think about it, right, and when I first shared when our core beliefs come from, it's something that starts very young, right? Men aren't taught at a young age that it's okay to emote the same way, women do. I was in church today, and I remember hearing the pastor, who was very emotional towards the beginning of the sermon, spoke about machismo among the Latin community. But in every culture, right, men are supposed to act a certain way. They're supposed to emote a certain way. They're supposed to communicate a specific way. Again, going back to modeling what we often see from our cultures, from our parents, etc. And the same apply to men. So when we think about therapy, I'm actually talking about my feelings. I'm communicating about my feelings. It's not something that is necessarily taught. I'm thankful that we live in a time where we can begin to talk about these things more. The whole idea that we have, this whole panel, this discussion, because it's so important. So when I see young men now, they're a little bit different, than the older school men that were taught, it's not okay to talk. But they also have reached a point. They've reached a crisis point or a breaking point where something has happened that has pushed therapy on them, where it's like it's no choice at this point, whether it's a parent, whether it's a school system. And my job as a therapist is to normalize it, is to destigmatize it, and to get to know them on a personal level. I feel that when we're able to connect on a human level, all the reasons that often get in the way of us getting therapy, they kind of vanish. But what we're going to talk about, you have to get to that first step. And that first step is often the most difficult step, So it's just getting to the point, whatever takes you there, to sit and be able to talk with someone. That's oftentimes, the point where this is okay, and it becomes a process.
Yeah. No, you're right. They often come, when I'm seeing them too, like in crisis, like something is really at that kind of tipping or breaking point. Joseph or Dr. Grimes or Pastor Daniels, what have you all seen in terms of what are some reasons men, especially, either take a while to get to therapy, or when they finally come to therapy, what are some misunderstandings about what therapy is, about the process that oftentimes you have to provide some education about?
I can go first.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find with a lot of veterans that I've worked with is that they've been told when they join the military branch, it doesn't matter which branch you're in, Army, Navy, Marines, it's been conditioned to them that they're not able to speak or convey their true thoughts and feelings. They're just told what to do. When I was a school social worker, I like what John was saying, was that I remember growing up, I didn't have my first male teacher until I was maybe 5th or 6th grade. And so there was always, and I love women, so I think we all can say that together, but there wasn't a lot of examples of men talking to other men, except if you go to a barbershop. And many times you go to a barbershop, or you're going to a football game, a lot of times they're talking about things around the issue, but many times no one's really talking about the issue itself. So when I find veterans coming to me now, it's to the point, like John was saying, they're in crisis. They're, as you mentioned earlier, I work in the PTSD clinic, so they're having nightmares, they're having hypervigilance, they're having startle reactions, they're not able to sleep. And it's coming to the point that they're not even able to deal with their own emotions and thoughts, and they thought they were going to be able to. A lot of times the veterans that I'm meeting with that come to therapy, they suppress their feelings and their emotions so long that by the time they come to me, it's usually out of control. They're like, I just need help. But when they were in the service, when they were not thinking about it, they're able to suppress it. And just personally for me, growing up, I was told to be seen, not heard. Told that men or boys don't cry. And then as I got older and I got into my field, I began to use John 11:35. If Jesus cried, then I can cry. If Jesus showed emotion, then I'm going to show emotion.
Right.
But I think a lot of times men in general think it's a weakness, not understanding that it's a meekness. And we'll talk about that later, but I just want to make that point, is that a lot of times there's not enough of this. And I think a brother mentioned earlier is that just having 4 African-American men on a panel talking about this is something unique and special, because it doesn't happen that way. So that's just something.
I appreciate that. For a while, I mean, it probably took me, I'll just say rough 20 years longer to get the help I need in terms of therapy, because of those very reasons, right? I was trying to tough it out on my own. I'm not weak. I don't need no help. I was in deep denial. I can do this by myself, struggling the whole time, right? And by the time I finally went to therapy and got some help, it's like, I said, this is like a long time ago, right? So brother, Dr. Grimes, along that line, when you're talking to clients, men in particular, young men, and you're explaining therapy, like, what do you kind of tell them to kind of help them kind of get it in a way where it's not like some lofty thing in the sky? Like, what is this therapy thing? I'm not crazy. I don't need therapy. Like, what is your approach, or how do you kind of explain it where they can kind of get it? And like John said, kind of normalize it. It's not for quote unquote somebody that's crazy, but at one point or another, I'm sure we all may need therapy, more or less.
And that's one of the things that I tell them. Unfortunately, therapy, like many other things, is shaped by the media. People think they're going to come in the office and lay down on the couch, and I'm going to take them back to their childhood. And people have all these conceptions that they've gotten from other places, and that can also be a barrier and seeking out therapy. So when they come to me, I'm like, hey, it's not what you've seen in the movies. This is first aid for your mind. If you went out there and got shot in the leg, if you were in a car accident, you wouldn't have any problem going to the hospital, getting the help that you need. You'd be begging somebody to take you to the hospital. And so this is, your mind, this is for your psychological health. And that's usually where I start at. You can go talk to one of your friends. I hear that a lot. I can go talk to one of my homeboys. No, they don't want to listen to you talk about your problems day after day or week after week after week. That's what I'm here for. And once you really break it down to them, put it on that level, they're usually a little bit more willing to open up.
To open up, yeah. I also I love that analogy in terms of, I'll say, mental health is really part of your total health, right? Same way something happened medically, no problem, but there's still that stigma, right? And I think we've come a long way with the stigma, but still more ways to go. Okay, thank you, Daryl, for the comment. We got some comments. Pastor Graham is in the house as well. So, Ms. Eve, you can put up our next question. We can keep the conversation going. All right. So, yeah, on a practical way, actually, Ms. Eve, I'm gonna go back to another question before that. So, and I'm gonna start with Pastor. So, how can men know, right, when to actually seek help? So what are some indicators to know, okay, this is something I can handle on my own. I'm going through a period that's a stressful time, a difficult patch, just a little period that's a little rough, versus saying, you know what, this is beyond me. I think I need to actually go out and seek professional help or talk to somebody to get that process started, right? What are some indicators or signs that can help somebody know whether maybe I should keep wrestling with this thing by myself, or you know what, maybe it's time to really open up to somebody and kind of get some additional support?
I think it takes so much longer for men that have never been in therapy to understand when to go to therapy. I think most of the time this is the order, and we've mentioned it before. We talk to our friends, our close friends, or we even talk to our spouse before we talk to our friends sometimes. And then we'll go, so again, from the church perspective, they'll come and talk to the pastor, and the pastor will pray for them. And I think if it lasts longer than after you've done those other ones you share with those individuals, and those feelings are still there, and you feel like there's no end to it, that's when you need to go and consult a professional. And it's really about starting and being honest with yourself. We have to identify and be honest and know that these feelings and these emotions are causing me to not be able to function the way I'm normally used to. And once it gets to that point and you've checked all these other boxes and those things are still there, and I'm going to get to this, but not that your faith is weakened. And I think that's where a lot of men struggle, especially from my perspective. I'm a church boy, born and raised, going to church. We equate including someone else, especially as a man, into something private like our feelings and emotions as a lack of faith and a sign of weakness. So those two together automatically put up walls in between the help that we need. And I'm hoping that after this pandemic, a lot of those walls are starting to come down.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So you're saying I just can't just pray about it and that's it? Like if I'm going through a rough patch, are you saying that there's more?
See, prayer is the foundation, but I think sometimes we don't even know, we haven't been culturally brought up to give our feelings and emotions the verbiage that it's needed. So we say pray about it. I believe in prayer. And I believe that prayer can help anyone through some mental health challenges they may be experiencing. But the language that we're using is not equal to the challenge that we're facing. So we're praying about things, and it's kind of like we're praying around the situation and we're not landing the plane. That's what the therapist and the counselor, whoever, helps you land the plane, give your situation and challenge verbiage and language in which to articulate it, so then we can get to the root of the problem. Instead of waving at the smoke, we deal with the fire.
I love it. Deal with the fire. You're right. I mean, so many men are just not in tune with their emotions, right? They don't even know how much stress you're under until you're at a crisis point or your body just breaks down, right? Any other thoughts, John, Dr. Grimes, Joe, in terms of kind of knowing the difference? Also on a practical level, in terms of like, how do I know if I'm really dealing with depression, or if it's anxiety, or if it's just a rough day at the job, or just an off day for me?
I mean,
go ahead,
Dr. Grimes.
if you're a lot of times your body will tell you, you say, I'm whatever is going on, I'm handling this just fine, but you hadn't slept in 3 days. I'm handling this just fine, but you just, you yelling at your kids, you yelling at your spouse, partner, whoever. You're on edge, looking around you. Something drops, jumping up. Like what? If you're handling this just fine, then why are these physical symptoms manifesting? kind of one of the things I like the young people say to each other. Well, how's that working out for you? People think that they're handling things just fine, just moving along, but it's like look at what's going on with your body. You know, you lost 15 pounds in a month. Like that's not okay. So a lot of times your body and people around you will let you know that this is not going through is not okay. And people may not have. I think you just mentioned that whether they're dealing with anxiety, depression. I think it's just a general feeling of I'm uncomfortable right now. Whatever I thought was working, they may not be able to tease out all the symptoms that may to label something this diagnosis or that one, but they just know that they're in a situation where they're uncomfortable, and whatever tools in their toolbox that they've been using to deal with these issues are not working anymore.
Right. I love it. I love it. Jean, you had a comment, then Joe, I think you were going to say something too.
Yeah, I was saying, oftentimes it's like Dr. Grimes said, it's the differences in sleep, it's the differences in diet, it's the difference and difficulties in daily experiences, which often indicate. But, you know, I worked in Baltimore City for a while, and I remember when I just started there introducing mental health to Paul Laurence Dunbar High School. And, you know, the students would see me in the halls, and they would say, Mr. Ardain, you see the crazy kids, right? I'd be like, wait a minute, what do you mean? You see the kids, you know, Mr. Ardain, they have problems, right? I'm like, wait a minute, do you have problems? Are there some times that you have some challenges with your parents or with a significant other? And as I began to talk with them more, they began to see, like, listen, the truth and the reality is we all struggle with different things. The reality is we all could probably benefit from having a therapist once in a while or even regularly, somebody just to bounce ideas off of, somebody just to, you know, speak with about things that are ruminating through our minds. So before even getting to the point where, you know, there's a big difference between my work production now than it was a month ago, or man, my diet's really off. Do you have things that are weighing on you that you'd like to discuss? These are indicators that therapy could be a potential answer. It's a discussion. Oftentimes people think therapy is, you know, the therapist is going to, again, back to that analogy that was talked about earlier. We're laying on a couch and we're speaking about our past, maybe sometimes, but the answers often come from ourselves. It's things that we need to do. So it's almost, listen, following our heart and our mind on what steps we need to take in order to be better, right? And trust me, oftentimes we know in social work that us as humans, we are the determinants in our success, not the therapist. You know, as Christians, we know we have a God that is there for us, supports us, but he also puts people in our lives to help us with that journey.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Go ahead, Joe. Like you wanted something?
I was going to sum it up and say, Brother Neil and Brother John just hit on the nail. They hit it. I just wanted to piggyback what Brother Grimes was saying about the toolbox. A lot of times the tools that they think that they don't have anymore. And so going and talking to someone, it's like a little checkup and say, hey, this used to work, but now it's not working anymore. So they captured it, I think, excellent. You know, so
Yeah. Just want to read this comment about Daryl Cedric Fraley. He said it also has a lot to do with your diet and health. Poor diet can cause mood swings in the body, can be difficult in the way we think. Absolutely. Dr. Grimes mentioned losing weight. You know, if you're gaining weight, things like that are indicators, and that's something to pay attention to. Your body will tell you. Your body definitely will tell you. Have any brothers you work with come in feeling less of a man, feeling weak because they're going to therapy or because a loved one, a spouse, family member, friend told them they need to get some therapy or recommended therapy, but they feel less strong, less of a man because they're in therapy?
I mean, I'll just put it out there. As a therapist, I need a therapist. And I'm going to say it straight up. I mean, just because I help other people, I was going through some difficult times, and having a therapist to be able to bounce some things off, they were able to help me see things that I couldn't see. And so this idea that I'm a therapist, I have the training, I'm helping other people. At first, I was like, nah, I can handle myself. But then my wife, my family, my friends, when I went through a lot of loss, noticing that, hey, you know what, you need to get some help that you need. So this ability of being vulnerable, this ability of being humble, this ability of saying, I need help, is something that's a strength, not a weakness. And I tell, I had a great experience when I was at Kaiser as a psychotherapist. I met a psychiatrist who brought her daughter in to see the pediatrician. And I was like, "You're a medical doctor, you're a psychiatrist." And she was like, "Yeah, but this is my baby. And I need another set of eyes on my baby. Because I may see things, but I need someone to make sure." And so I'm taking my psychiatry, my medical, my and I'm having someone else to look at it with better eyes. So it was another question that you brought, but I tell my clients, my veterans all the time, look, I see a therapist. I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. And I need someone that I can bounce things off of. So when another man lets another man know that it's okay to see someone, it kind of brings down that level of anxiety and stress. Because we all need each other. And you and I have been talking about all the time. We learn a lot from our clients. We learn a lot from, and even though we're experts in our fields, we're always willing to learn. And this cultural, this ability of being humble, it does something not for ourselves, but also for our clients as well. And it breaks down that barrier of saying this hierarchy of, you're this or that, but no, we're here together. We're going to work. And I think a brother, I don't know who said it, but it's not about us as the therapist, it's about them doing the work. So we need to make sure that we give them the tools to do what they need to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it. I love the phrase you said earlier too, Joseph, about it's not about weakness, but about meekness, right? And thank you for sharing this and being vulnerable to share. I mean, that's not easy to do. Some people are like, well, you have a therapist, right? But that's how we kind of pull down the stigma, right? I had a therapist, right? I had a psychiatrist. Actually, I still do, right? On medication for depression and anxiety at times, right? And so, and there's other ways to treat it, right? Not just medication, but kind of putting that out there where it's no shame, kind of reducing the stigma. That can help, be very helpful. So there's a question here I want to pitch to you brothers, to Daniels and to Dr. Grimes. So if there's some men, what would you say to some men who are out there, or they could be friends of those men or spouses or family members of those men who they clearly see are struggling, right? Or they may be in the valley of decision, not sure if they should go or not go, or what somebody's going to think of them or not. What would you say that may kind of encourage them to take that step, right? To seek help. And then the second part to that question is, like, what are the steps a person can take to get help? So the first part is, what would you say to someone who's kind of in that valley, kind of wrestling with whether to get help or supporting a family member of somebody who's clearly not him or herself? What are some words that could help that person seek help?
So some of the words. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Doc. You good?
Oh, I'll keep it simple. I'll ask them, what do you have to lose? Now, when you look at that list of, okay, what do I have to lose by potentially going to a therapist and talking about all my problems, issues, maybe a little bit of an ego blow. That's probably what you got, and a copay probably. But when you talk about when you stack everything else up against that list, your family, maybe your job, your sanity, I think that list is so much more heavier than if you actually take that risk and reach out to somebody.
And I love that, right? So it's like ego versus like having some relief from all these problems that's weighing me down. Clearly, my toolbox, I don't have enough tools. I don't even know what tool to use, right? Pastor Daniels, you had a comment as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I think would help individuals that are struggling to go is maybe consider going with them on the first session, sitting down with them together, taking away the stigma. And and just to go along with what Joseph and what you said, Ruben, I also see a therapist. I don't know where I'd be now in my marriage and in my life without a therapist, especially coming through this pandemic. So I'm another brother. I'm seeing a therapist right now. And so without apology, without any shame or guilt, I don't feel any of that stuff. But I think one of the ways to help someone, and it might be parent, child, it might be friend, go with them and say, you know what? I'm going to do it too. I mean, if we really believe in therapy, and if we really believe that God, like John mentioned, God uses people, professionals, to help minister to us in our time of need, whether in the hospital, whether at the mechanic shop, whatever it is, we have no fear of taking our car to the mechanic, all that stuff. But for some reason, mental health falls into this negative stigma. But I think modeling what we want and expect for our children when they need help, and then to be willing to go along and to sit in on a session or two with that friend of theirs, a family member, whoever it is. I think that will help kind of assuage the tense situation. And a good brother friend of mine, Cecil Calise, and I'll never forget when he said, it was a Friday night, we were with the young people. He said, it's better to deal with 30 seconds of uncomfort than a lifetime of regret and stress and anxiety not doing it. And so again, when you equate those two, like Dr. Neal said, what do you got to lose? That 30 seconds of uncomfort? Or because once you get in there, most time, you are, I'm sure we can testify, once we get in there, once those brothers sit across from us, those men, those fathers, those young people, the dam breaks, everything starts flowing out, so that's what I would encourage, modeling, and consider and suggesting that maybe if you want me to come along with you, I'm willing.
Yeah. And then what are some practical ways too? I love that too, in terms of like getting started, right? Is, so they go online, pull up a list of people, call their insurance company, like on a practical way, like what are some things that people could do if they're interested into looking into therapy?
Read a book, hop online, do some YouTube searches. Therapy, you get the most out of therapy is what you put in. And if you're really ready to make that change and to address your challenges, you're going to invest in it. And I think it's important that we consider seeing a therapist, seeing a counselor is investing in ourselves, investing in our marriage, investing in our future, investing in our business, investing in our relationships. These are all investments. And the example I love is that when I think about LeBron James has like 7-8 coaches, and and most of us know that he has his close friends. I forget the term they call themselves, but these guys have been in his life for years. And you think he would have been as successful without those guys? So we have no problem with LeBron James, the best of the best of the best at his stage in career. But somehow we think if we include a coach, we could call him a coach. I'm sure none of the brothers on here would mind if you say, hey, I'm going to see my coach. Okay, yeah, that's cool. Nobody would think different. Maybe we should need to reframe the language. But as long as the problem gets addressed, I don't see any issue with someone investing in themselves, doing the research. But again, because all good therapists put the ball on the client side, and they determine how deep, how far, how impactful it really will be.
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple comments from we got Daryl. It's important to listen and try to direct the person to seek help. Absolutely. And Dwight Palmer says, evening brothers, therapy really starts with the individual. What I mean is that you would identify the problem in order to see the need to remedy the situation. Yep, that is so true. Right. So, I mean, if you go to Psychology Today, .com, these brothers on here are therapists, right? And so I know Joke works for the VA. Pastor Daniel, I think you're seeing clients now, and Dr. Grimes. We'll put your information, drop that in the chat later on. But you can search your zip code. You can put in your zip code, see who's accepting insurance, or if you have insurance, you can call your insurance company. They typically have a mental health or behavioral health department. They sometimes may have a list of internal providers. You can start there, or talk to somebody who may be in therapy already. So with the shift, I mean, 20, 30, 40 years ago, especially in the Black community, I mean, I don't think many people are getting therapy, right? But now that there's a movement, we have celebrities, we have individuals like us, we're just kind of being open and transparent about where we are with seeking mental help. It's less stigmatized, but there's still a strong stigma that's out there. I did want to shift. So Eve, this question is not on our banner question, but it relates to trauma, right? And so I was talking with a gentleman in therapy the other day, and just trying to understand, like he didn't equate all the experiences he's been through. He's seen somebody shot, I think, almost at gunpoint. His parents divorced. He just had a kind of a rough upbringing, but he didn't really equate that to being like traumatic because he had seen so much of it. Like, oh, that's trauma, right? And even if a person doesn't experience direct trauma, whether it's physical, verbal, sexual abuse, right? What about the witnessing of trauma? What about being a person of color, like in this world, or just seeing things happen in other countries, right? Like what's happening in the Middle East and things of that nature, right? Being traumatized. So, can you speak a little bit about this trauma, how trauma may show up in a person's life, how trauma impacts relationships, or how this trauma impacts just men, right? Because I think men, even so, may be less likely to even talk about trauma. If they come to therapy, they may not, of course, talk about some deep trauma, but in what ways in society do you all see where men are dealing with different types of trauma? And I'm pitching to Joe because you're the trauma guru.
I was waiting to go last, but So professionally, when I'm working at the VA, we have assessments. We have tools, and offline, Ruben and I were talking about making it as layman as possible, right? So I'll just make it as layman as possible. But when we're talking about trauma, when it comes to the layperson who's coming in, we have to look at the characteristics that make up the trauma, make up the post-traumatic stress. Because there's language that we use as professionals, or use as we have to sometimes use words that they can relate to. And I can say this on Facebook, and I can say it on the Seabrook. Everyone experiences things differently. So, for example, growing up, I got the strong hand being spanked, and it wasn't spanked. I thought I was getting beat. I was getting a belt. And when I talk to some people, they're like, "That's not trauma. That's not trauma. That's just that's how you just grew up, right?" But in other situations, another person experienced, they could say that is trauma. So when we look at what is required, there's a criteria that we have in PTSD, and for the criteria, it's called the criterion A. This is when a person's been exposed to death, they're threatened to death, have been threatened to sexual violence. And when it comes to individuals who have experienced that, but they have been grown in this environment, they've been grown in this, they don't see it as being traumatic. They don't see it as being anything different. But as mentioned earlier, the result of that trauma comes out with nightmares, with irrational thoughts, with alertness, with hypervigilance, with the negative core beliefs, with the negative. And so when they find someone they can talk to and open up, and that provider, which is us, we hear it, we can actually say, "Hey, do you think that you've experienced some trauma? Do you think that you've had that?" And many times I found out that when we break it down a little bit and explain from the experience, a lot of individuals will say, "Yeah, I guess I am traumatized," right? We can talk about how, and I'm not going to go deep into it, but we've got this post-slave mentality, right? From the transatlantic, a lot of African-American men have been abused. We got the systematic racism. We got all these things that we've gone through, and we sort of normalize it and say it is what it is. A lot of times I work with veterans, and even when I was doing in the school system, it was like, this is how it's supposed to be. And a lot of times they might not even know the difference of what is trauma and what is not trauma. So the first thing I would suggest is have an educational or do some psychoeducation and letting people know what are traumatic events. And then being honest and saying, "Hey, let me look at the situation and go into it." I could tell you countless times when veterans are sitting at we're at a desk, and they say, "I'm fine, I'm good." There's this one, his name is David Goggins. He's one of my favorite. This guy's like, can't hurt me. And he does these marathons, he runs, he exercises, like he's the strongest man I've ever seen. But as I'm listening to his story, he's dealing with trauma. Like he's literally dealing with trauma. And his first book was about You Can't Hurt Me. His second book that I'm listening to is called Never Give Up. And he's going back and talking about the abuse from his father, the abuse from, and he's recognizing that even though he is a strong man and he's doing all these things, he's gone through some traumatic experience. So, and I'm not going to get technical, but we all have gone through trauma, but there's different levels of trauma. So I could go on, but I'm going to let somebody talk because I can go on and on.
Yeah, I want to know. I appreciate that. Pastor Daniel, Dr. Grimes, or Dr. Aldain, you want to share?
The one thing I'll mention is quickly that, you know, when the Bible says that the sins of the father go down to the third and fourth generation, I believe it includes trauma. And again, we find a way to minimize it, I think, just by default, because some of us have gone through such hell in life that we find any way to push it away religiously, to push it away intellectually, to push it away emotionally. I'm fine. And one of my old youth directors would sit us down. He was he worked at a school that dealt with at-risk students, and he would come and share the stories about all the challenges that they had. And he said he would sit them down. He said, "Okay, how are you feeling? You know, check in with them." And then if anybody said that they were fine, he would say, "Oh, okay, you're feeling fearful, insecure, neurotic, emotional." And he always kind of pulled, because he was trying to get them to give word and language to it, because we default with, "Oh, I'm fine," so that people will leave us alone. They'll stop asking us questions. But I think it's deeper than that. And we'll probably get into this later, but my passion is why I chose pastoral counseling as opposed to therapy or mental health or et cetera, is to help the church. I'm a church boy. Help the church build a bridge between faith and mental health, and eliminate these stigmas and this rhetoric and this lack of faith that supposedly people have when they go see a therapist, go see a counselor for whatever reason, to know that the Bible talks about mental health. Many of the individuals in the Bible have mental health challenges and have experienced trauma, and how the Spirit of God can help individuals through small groups and things like that to help us all who have all been traumatized work through it together, and to not isolate ourselves and think that I'm the only one who's dealing with these challenges and these thoughts.
Absolutely. I like that. Just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please drop that in the chat. You have 4 distinguished gentlemen who are very knowledgeable, or comments. You know, we definitely want you to join the conversation and stay engaged. Thank you, Pastor Daniels. Dr. Grimes, what's been your experience in working with individuals in terms of trauma or traumatic experiences?
One of the things, I mean, I think Brother Warren and Brother Daniels covered it in detail, but I kind of wanted to highlight as well. When I do trauma, when I work with people with trauma, I come from a trauma-informed care perspective, which is not why are you this way? It's how did you become this way? What's your life story? What happened? We're all kind of a product of our trauma. I mean, and it's important to two people. We all have different trauma filters. Two people can see the exact same thing or go through the exact same experience, but process it differently. That's important, not just for me as a therapist to know that, but also for those people that have brothers, husbands, friends, any kind of family members that may come to them with problems. You know, one of the things in the Black community, we got a cliche saying amongst men, you know, come to you with the problem. Why are you acting like a little, you know? And and that can immediately cause somebody to go into their shell and not want to speak about whatever it is. So it's you have to keep in mind that because something may not be an issue to you, or you might not seek help for it, it could be very problematic for somebody else.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you for that. And to the shout out to Gerald Thomas, who's joining the discussion as well. I'm going to move on to a different question, but so we want to leave you out, John, if you wanted to add or share anything about that topic on trauma.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the younger minds out there and parents, right, of the younger ones. So in education, right, first we recognize what trauma is. Okay. When I'm speaking from an educational perspective, we see trauma is not just an experience that you had, but an emotional reaction to experience that you had. And naturally working in the educational field and working with younger people, we see a term that we use often, which is dysregulation, which a student is not
Mm.
really present. They're not really interacting. They're not really um, able to communicate, or their behavior is really poor. And we may see this in sometimes our children. And oftentimes this is a result of trauma. This is the emotional reaction to trauma. In the
Mhm.
educational setting, we see this from neglect. Oftentimes we see it from a lack of nutrition. We see this from abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, and or sexual. We look at things called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And those experiences can be poverty, they can be all these things. And what they essentially do, what all these negative experiences do in terms of trauma, is it changes the way the brain works. Plain and simple. It changes the way the brain works. Kids operate from this fight or flight mode in which they're just trying to survive. They're not trying to logic, they're not trying to talk, they're not trying to get to know and form any connections. They're just simply trying to survive. Well, if we were to fast forward and come to, some of our ages now, if we're coming from that, it becomes very difficult to grow positive relationships with adults because of this huge gaps. Okay. If our mind was set a certain way when we were younger, it becomes very difficult now as adults, kind of even more set in our ways to move forward. And that's where therapy comes in. And any good therapist will say, listen, it doesn't just stop with therapy, which is a whole nother discussion. We may need to go to psychiatry. We may need medicine to help the brain chemicals and the brains that have been forced to function a certain way from a young age. We have to do something
Mm.
else to get some help. But as all the gentlemen have stated, it is a sign of courage. And by the way, I want to jump on the I've had therapy because we're killing all the stigmas right now. I, Jean Elodin, would not be here if it weren't for therapy at an extremely difficult place in my life. So much so that when I started therapy, I wasn't even a therapist. The therapist that I had was so inspiring to me that I wanted to model my life in some ways like him, to become a therapist and
Mm.
begin to impact some of the lives, that I've been graced to have an impact. So I want to jump on that background real quick. But listen, this trauma stuff, these adverse childhood experiences, these stuff
Yeah.
that happen in our early development, the things that bring out this emotional response and reaction to us, they're real. And
Yeah.
listen, therapy is a way that we can address them.
Yeah. I love it.
And
It
so
can
let
get deep.
me just say really
Go
quick.
ahead.
I'm,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and chime in as well. I have a therapist, so
Okay. We on the same page. We all in the same boat.
there's a big takeaway for anybody watching this. You've got a panel of five therapists, who have all or majority admitted to having or have seen a therapist in the past. That if, in case you're on the fence, you're wondering that's important, because you don't have people just talking at you about this is what you should do. We're actually walking the walk, or have walked the walk in the past. We've done the work ourselves. So I just thought it was very important to point that
That's
out to those
important.
people.
No, thank you for that.
Watch it.
No, yeah, current and past.
Good point. Good point.
There's a question from Damian Johnson that I would like you to pop. There we go. Post it back up, and then whoever would like to kind of take a crack at this one. So I've been hearing the term moral injury. Is that the same as trauma? And if not, what's the difference? Moral injury and trauma. Any takers?
So
Go ahead, Dr. Grimes.
moral injury is really when you feel like you hear the term associated a lot with war. I don't know that it's synonymous with trauma necessarily, but it can definitely lead to trauma at some point. And it's basically when whatever your moral compass is, you feel like whatever you may be taking part in, at least it's my understanding, it violates that moral compass or your own moral principles.
I would agree with Dr. Grimes. I think the primary difference is that, remember, trauma brings about elicits an emotional response. As a child, I saw a dog get ran over by a car. Now, when I see dogs, I start sweating, I start fretting, I go into an anxiety attack. That's what separates it. The emotional response that's elicited from a reminder kind of sets trauma aside from just, a hurt feelings, right? Or hurt pride, or, someone feeling differently, which what moral injury kind of stem from.
Yeah. Brother John hit it on the nail, and Dr. Grimes also hit it as well too. That they can both be used simultaneously, but moral injury, according to the DSM-5, and the DSM-5, for those who know, is like the psychological Bible that we have where all the mental disorders are there. It's not considered a mental illness. It's something that creates feelings of guilt, shame, anger, sadness, and anxiety. Trauma can, as Brother John just said, it can lead to those things. But I'll give you a good example. I have a veteran who has a Muslim background, and he was undercover as a spy for the government, and he had to do some things that he thought was wrong, that was against his belief and faith, but he could not let them know that he was of the same faith as well too. So he had this little moral injury of feeling of guilt that he couldn't speak up. The guilt that even though he was commissioned by the government to do certain things, it kind of caused him to feel in a certain way. Well, it turned out that feeling led to the PTSD because, and of course, I can't share everything, but he participated in some things where he saw something that was traumatic, and that led to the PTSD because now he's having the dreams and the startle hypervengeance and those type of things. So there is a difference, but I like what both Dr. Grimes and John just said, that it leads in that direction. So,
yeah, absolutely. So if you can put the comments, there's one about Dwight and there's one by Gerald Thomas. Just want to read that, acknowledge that. Thank you for sharing, by the way. So Dwight says a lot of emphasis is being placed on the man to be the backbone of the family, the man to correct everything, the man to steer the children in the right direction. This can be traumatic when we fail. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's that pressure, that expectation of having to do those things. And if it's not done correctly or to the expectation, there's a traumatic response to failing or feeling like you failed or the perception of failing. No, thank you for sharing that, Dwight. Any thoughts on Dwight's comment? Anybody wanted to, before we move on?
Ruben, I'll share, but I wanted to go back quickly to moral injury. Okay. And I'm curious of my other my fellow therapists that are out here that are on the call with me now, if they've experienced this, where when I hear moral injury, and I haven't done a whole lot of research on it, but I hear church hurt. Again, coming from the church perspective, where a lot of individuals sadly have experienced a lot of negative experiences, traumatic experiences from those that they've respected in leadership, pastor, elder, deacon, deaconess, something like that. And I don't know, recently it's come out a lot during the pandemic, where this term of deconstructing our faith, because a lot of individuals, especially my young professionals, my young adults, they are dealing with stuff that they finally got a chance to leave, quote unquote, leave church without the stigma and the negativity of leaving church and walking away from God, et cetera, due to the pandemic. They've gotten a chance to kind of get a reprieve. It's now they've had a kind of a safe space to kind of deconstruct some of the things that have been traumatic to them. And I think it's important that the church allow that and say, what happened to you did happen, and it shouldn't have happened. And this is sticky. This is you talk about uncomfortable conversations, and I could get deep into that, but I think if we don't allow that space, there's no way the church can move forward and expect those same young people to come back to church, because that's the wall that now they've gotten permission to give it language. And in their mind, if no one mentions any of this publicly or from the pulpit or whatever, that tells me that you're unwilling to address it. So I'm going to hold on to my injury, and I'm going to hold on to it as a way to justify my not coming back. So that's just from my perspective. I'm curious to hear what everyone on the panel has said. Maybe if they've come across that with other clients.
I'm gonna jump in just real quick. Well, no, that can be a whole topic of itself. Moral injury or church trauma, right? Because who's in the church? The same people that leave church and go live their lives when they're not at church, right? And so a lot of experiences that we're seeing, in our practice, unfortunately, it happened in the church. We talked about verbal, physical, sexual abuse, moral injuries, lack of validation, lack of acceptance, not seeing others, not showing kindness, not showing love, right? And so there's a lot of hurt, like you said, in the church. And that runs very deep, right? But any other comments from what Pastor Daniels has shared in terms of more injury, church hurt, church trauma?
So I can just give personal experience of church hurt. And I'm looking at the time, so I don't want to take too much time, but I'll make one point and then find the solution of that point. When I lost my father in 2012, to Pastor Daniel's point, a lot of people in the church don't know how to respond to trauma, grief, and pain. They don't know what to say. So I'm glad Sister Eve said keep the Kleenex next to me, because if a couple tears come down, don't judge me. But I'm just letting you know it's gonna be difficult when I say this. But when I came back, they were telling me, where's your faith? I thought you're stronger than this. When are you gonna come back and teach Sabbath school? We're expecting you to come back and get involved. Don't you understand where he is right now? Why are you crying? Don't you have the blessed hope? And at that time, some of these people didn't know that I know the word very well, and they're quoting scriptures incorrectly. They were giving me something that was not good. And so I began to do something that we know as therapists, but project my hurt and anger upon people. And then I began to put it on the institution. And then I began to not even go to church anymore. And then I began to isolate myself. And then after 2012, I lost my uncle in 2013. I lost my mother in 2014. I lost another grandparent in 2016. I lost my sister to breast cancer in 2017. And I was formulating in my mind that the church was a place that I had to go to get the support that I need. Because when I was hearing people in the church having problems, they would come to me and I would support them. But when I would go to them, they wouldn't support me. And then my wife had a kidney transplant in 2019. And then people in my family like, Joe, you've been going through some trauma. You're going through a lot of stuff. But then I began to realize that because the church was not equipped, that I rather don't want to deal with church people no more. I don't want to do nothing wrong with church people. And then I left the church. I stopped going to church. I stopped praying. I stopped doing all these things. But I had a wife, a strong wife, who says, I know you're going through some pain. I know you're going through some hurt. And so when I stopped believing, she kept on believing. She kept on taking our daughter. And then I would go outside and I'll find different communities, the LGBT community. I began to find other people who accepted me and loved me. And they said, it's going to be okay. And then I met someone who said, we're going to start something in this church to create a wellness, an emotional wellness, because the church doesn't know what to do. So I've been hurt and I want you to help. And I told this person, I'll help other people, but I want to help Adventists. They've hurt me too much. And this other person looked at me and just said, it's okay, I understand. And when I got that unconditional regard, or that empathy, in translation for those who are there, unconditional regard means accepting me who I am without any judgment. That person said, I see you, I hear you, and I appreciate you. And then I was going to therapy, and that's why I go to therapy, and I realized as I'm working with others that I also got to use the same thing when I'm helping other people, to not throw the baby out the bathwater. But it's hard. And I'm saying this to someone out there right now that you may see me smiling. You may see me on this panel, but we all go through hurt. We all go through pain. And this moral injury, this church hurt is real. And there's so many things that we can do to help, but we don't want to humble ourselves, be vulnerable. And so I'm going to say this, and there was a question a long time ago, but if someone is looking for help, go to your friend. And maybe a friend knows a friend who knows a friend. And that friend can help you find someone that you need. But I'm going to say this, and I know I shouldn't, I don't know what's going on right now, but since you asked this, and I want to share this, because someone out there may be in some severe pain right now, who's going through something right now, and they think that there's no hope. I'm letting you know there is hope. And I can tell now, I'm back in the church. I'm going to church. I'm part of the ministry. It's because of God, but it's because I got out of this box. I changed my mindset. Brother John mentioned a couple of days ago of this growth mindset of learning to grow and not looking at the church for all my answers, not looking at people but finding hope in people who can support me and guide me in that direction. And so this church is important, but we have to look at it in holistic view and realize that hurt people. Number one. Number two, people would do better if they know better. And then number three, what Dr. Edith Fraser said, my professor that I love so much, he said, Joseph, when you went to people to help, you're a therapist and you're asking people for help. And if you can't do it, how are they going to help you when you're the professional? And they're scared. They don't know what to do. But because I was socialized from the cradle to college in this church and this idea, I had this Santa Claus in my head idea. If I do everything right, then everything's going to be okay. Not realizing that he said there will be hard times. You will be going through difficult times. And so one of the things I want to share with anyone on this panel right now, and in the larger view, that if you're going to things, ask for help. Pastor Damian Johnson preached a sermon today. He said, never lose hope. And that's one thing I want to say, because once you lose that hope, then you lose the fact. And if you can't get it from the church, if you can't get it from people they support you, go and find hope wherever you can find that hope. Appropriate hope, balanced hope, not alcohol and something. And I'm saying that we have to be open, and when we find the love and support, we should go there. And I'm telling you, and I'm done because I can talk forever. If it wasn't for some people in a group that I was considered to be wrong, awful, and horrible, I would not be sitting here. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and my friend, who was a bisexual, invited me over. It was two lesbian women, and I grew up, that was horrible. But these individuals took me in, loved me, and I began that this is not who I am. I may have different beliefs, but this is where I found the love and support. And so now I'm going back, and I'm not going to change my beliefs and who I am, but I'm going to show love to this population. And I'm going to love them for who they are, regardless. And no one's going to say anything about it. If you do, you can talk me offline. But I'm not going to cause anybody and hurt anybody because of who they are and where they've come from, because I've been there. And I've gone to a place where I thought people were seeking hope, and they're in there. So my job now is to go to them and tell them the message. Tell them about someone who I have learned and grew, and I grew, so I'm hoping they can grow as well too, without judgment, with all love. And I'm going to love them unconditionally. Because Jesus said he loves everybody. He don't love the sin, but he loves everybody. And that's what I want to do. I'm sorry taking too much time, and I'm going to get my Kleenex. Sorry about that.
No, that's why we have you on, Brother Joe. You got a couple of thank yous, and Philip and another brother who mentioned thank you as well, right? Because what you and Brother Emmanuel, so you're a living testimony of, and I tell my clients too, like we're all a work in progress, right? Like we're all a work in progress, right? And so having all those losses, going through traumatic events and situations, right? However, there's healing. Like healing is possible. Like it is possible to get through the most difficult, heartbreaking, horrific times with the right support, with therapy, with just a total package, right? Friends, God, faith, your wife, right? But the healing can and does happen. Deeply, thank you for sharing, Joseph. Absolutely. There was another question I wanted to go back to, right? But I definitely don't want to miss out on the comments that John or Dr. Grimes or Pastor Daniels may have regarding the church moral injury or the church aspect that we've been on for a few minutes.
Yeah, talking with people who've experienced moral injury, oftentimes they have pointed their vitriol and their anger to the church when the church is indeed set up of people. But we need to make sure that we don't worship people, or we shouldn't worship people. We worship a God, and I think that's the most important thing. Joseph, thank you so much for your testimony. It can't be better said than that. At some point, we have to connect to this God, and like we said earlier, that God connects us and uses people to bring us back to Him. Sometimes people may be therapists. Sometimes those people will come from communities where we least expect it. But that's, to me, the beauty of love. It transcends everything. It is powerful and it can cut through titanium. There's nothing that can hold back love, specifically God's love. I'm thankful for God's actions in your life, Joseph, and His love is for us. He wants us at our best, at our most complete, healthiest state, holistically, fully, completely. So thank you.
Yes, I love that. And I love that love. I love that cuts through titanium. That's powerful. That's powerful.
Ruben, real quick,
Go ahead.
and Joseph, I'm just stirred. If I didn't preach like 8 times this week, I'd be running around here just thanking God for your experience and your journey and where He's brought you from and where He's brought you to. But it's embarrassing, I'll say, for the church in general, of how we minister to people when they're grieving. It's embarrassing. I'm gonna say it straight. When my mom passed in 2021, I already knew that it would be some ridiculous comments and toss in scriptures like there, because a lot of people. This is kind of off topic, but a lot of people use scripture to kind of keep people at arm's length because they have never processed their emotions and their grief, and so we use scripture as a wall to check the box. See, God, I ministered to so-and-so. I gave them the scripture, but I've learned and I experienced personally that really transformed me was with a chaplain that was with my mom's care facility before she passed, and she was assigned to mom as to the family, and she told me that you're going to be a different version. You're going to be a different version of yourself after your mom passes than you are before. That language helped me to frame my journey towards healing and recovering, and knowing that I can grieve, my heart can be in 1,000 pieces, but still my faith was through the roof because that's what she modeled for me. But again, if I didn't have that sacred space in that conversation with that chaplain, it would have taken me much longer to kind of work my way through it. But because I took time to sit down and have that conversation, to have that appointment, it helped scale my healing and my recovery. And I think that's where professionals, again, it's about scaling our recovery. Our friends can help minister to us, and the church in good situations that actually know how to minister can do the same thing. But the scaling comes when you have a professional that has seen multiple different clients with the same challenges that you're facing to help you not have to work it out yourself, but just that one comment, that one phrase, that one way, that new way of thinking, that reframing that they help us do. That's the transformation that is needed. And again, that's your experience. Joseph, you represent those youth and young adults that are now potentially going through similar situations and have gone through. I'm hoping that they won't have to go all these years without the church to be the resource that I believe God wants us to be post-pandemic. To me, this is the best evangelism tool we could ever have. If we, again, equate faith with addressing our mental health, we can pull and we would have to have all kind of different services and small groups that the church, as opposed to snapping back to normal and kind of snapping back to some churches, some spaces where we can finally open our club back. All the members that were there before, as opposed to the church of the living God that's called to go and minister to individuals in the valley and in the gutter and in communities where they don't have any kind of language or care for God, they still need to be ministered to. So this is my passion, and what you shared is you represent those individuals. So I'm thankful that God has brought you out of that, and I'm heartbroken that you've had to experience all that. But I know that God is able, and it's not about why we experience these things. It's about how we can move forward and trust God that He allows certain things that aren't good, but for our good eventually, so you could be that new bridge that others could come over from your experience, from your testimony.
I want to say something real quick. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, brothers, for sharing. Thank you for the comments. There's a thing called validation and appreciation, so I want to say that. But I also make it a point, Pastor, that I'm also glad that we have Brother Neil from Atlanta on here, because we have to also extend our resources outside of our own denomination, like our own faith. It's so important because we're here talking within our own denomination, but it's also understanding that we have to reach out to outside if we can't come to the church. So I want to make it really clear, just in case my experience is my experience. The church is not bad in its sense, right? But it's also important that if you can't find it there, then find someone else outside of your faith. Or a person who may not even know what kind of faith you have, but who has the compassion, like you said, Pastor Daniels. The church doesn't have all the answers, right? I believe Jesus does. I think God does. But I think that we have to be wise to find the resources that we need. So I want to make sure, because I don't want to assume that anyone on this call or someone, I'm not down to the church, I'm not down to the denomination, I'm just giving my experience. But I'm so grateful that Ruben asked Dr. Grimes to be here. He's not from this area, he's in Atlanta. Just be able to have that resource, because sometimes people may be scared to even go to their own congregation, right? So yeah, just want to share that.
Thanks for sharing. And Dr. Grimes, I definitely want to pull you in. Also, you're a Christian. You identify as Christian. I'm not sure which specific denomination down in Atlanta. You're definitely a Christian brother, a part of the faith. Is there anything you wanted to share in terms of church moral injury, or your experience, your professional experience, as it relates to this topic?
I think the brothers did a pretty comprehensive job of addressing that issue.
Okay.
So I guess in the spirit of expediency, I'll defer any comments I have to the end. I want to make sure the listeners get a chance to post any comments that they have.
I appreciate that. So Eve, I'm going to go back to, there was a comment that was about trauma. Gerald, there we go. Thank you. All right. I just wanted to give voice to this, because definitely thank you for sharing, being very transparent. So Gerald Thomas says, I've experienced many traumatic events in my 74 years. I was shot at 19, attacked by a group of young men with bricks, and hit by cars, that's plural, age 4 and 34. However, God has brought me through. Excuse me. We thank you, Brother Gerald, for sharing that. Oh, drafted at 20 years old, but served 11 years. Yeah, very, very traumatic. And there's a term too, Joe, I thought you were going to mention this. You're probably going that direction, but it's called post-traumatic growth, right? And so, Joe, that's a lot of trauma. I'm just curious as to, like, how did you deal with all that trauma? Did you go to therapy? Did you talk to somebody? You can drop that in the chat. Like, what helped you with all those traumatic experiences? Because that's a lot of trauma. That's your experience. But like you said, Pastor Daniels, in terms of it's not good, but God can use it for the good, right? And we are different as a result of that. And that's where that healing and that growth happens. And we are able to help people in a different way than we were prior to those traumatic experiences. So thank you for sharing. So there was a question I want you to pull up for us, Eve. It was about how can people on a practical level just deal with, what are some just practical tools of dealing with like stress, anxiety, depression, just day-to-day things that can just be helpful, whether that's exercise, diet, or just what are some things that a person can do, like starting tonight or tomorrow, right, that they can start to implement if they're dealing with some of the things we talked about. particularly stress, depression, and anxiety? Go for it, Ryan.
I'll start from the church. I don't know what that means from church perspective, but exercise is vital to our mental health. Our bodies are made to move, and I believe that a lot of times the healing that we want to experience from the mental health challenges, from the trauma that we've experienced, occurs in collaboration with us exercising and keeping our bodies in shape. And because the body needs oxygen, and I don't have the statistic here, but we in general as human beings don't breathe a fraction of enough of the way our bodies are need and our brains need in order to work efficiently, to optimally. And a lot of times I know when I fight anxiety, that my breathing is what helps me. So powerful breathing exercises, box breathing, these are things that are practical that you could do anywhere at any time, but they are pivotal until I don't know, between sessions, or, you have an episode right now and you can't really, that breathing and exercise, those are two things right away. Drinking water. I mean, the foundational things that we overlook. Some of us who are fighting depression and fighting anxiety and fighting these challenges know the importance of them, and we know what we feel like when we don't, and we skip 2 or 3 days, and we're not consistent. We know how we're impacted negatively, and all of a sudden these emotional challenges and mental health thoughts start popping back up. And that's why it's important that if we don't take care of our bodies right, especially with exercise and getting enough fresh air and water, those are the three you can do at any time to begin to address some of the challenges they may have with anxiety, depression, and all these other challenges in life.
Nice, thank you. So fresh air, water, and some exercise.
And I definitely agree with all of those, especially the exercise. A lot of times when you're dealing with something that's causing anxiety, stress, you're going to need, like, you've got tools that you can use that are going to help you down the line process those things, and then you've got things that you need immediately. For instance, like road rage. I could talk to you about, CBT, putting your thoughts on trial and all that stuff, but that's not going to necessarily help you in that moment when somebody cuts you off. That's when you're going to need to do something like some deep breathing exercises in order to at least calm yourself down, restore those cortisol levels so that you can, after that, begin to process the incident. But exercise, especially, I think somebody earlier on in the conversation posted the importance of eating right. That can't be understated. A lot of the antidepressants that they use, they affect levels of serotonin and dopamine. Well, they say that as much as 95% of the body's serotonin is in the gut. There was a movie out a while back. Maybe Super Size Me, I think that was the name of it, where a guy just ate McDonald's for 30 days straight and almost went into kidney failure. It was extremely depressed, just all kind of stuff. So that's important as well. But usual suspects: exercise, deep breathing. And think about it, you learned that in kindergarten. Right, somebody stole your toy, right before you go smack them upside the head, the teacher would say, go stand somewhere, take 10 deep breaths. Progressive muscle relaxation is another one. And these days, once upon a time ago, you had to go into your therapist's office and, they had these techniques that only the therapist could teach you. But you could put deep breathing, you could put progressive muscle relaxation, you could put any number of things into a Google search bar, and numerous videos, articles, things will pop up that can guide you through that.
Yeah, and they have so many apps too, right? On your phone, you can download all kind of different apps. Music can be helpful, right? Just simple things that you may have gotten away from because life has gotten busy, responsibilities happen, whether it's art, whether it's sports or just something you used to enjoy that you just haven't done, like painting, drawing, just simple things, having fun, right? I talk to my clients often about like, what are you doing lately to actually just have fun, right? And just general self-care, right? So just self-care. What are some things you've been ignoring for a while? You need to take a day off. Do you need a break? Do you need like a mini vacation, a staycation? Like, what is it that you need that can kind of refill and recharge your body? Do you need to cut back on your to-do list? Some people are trying to do everything. It's just too much, right? Can you just focus on maybe two things or one thing at a time and just scale back, right? And so these things kind of reduce some of the pressure. Or like the big one the brother said earlier, ask for help, right? Like that's a big one. That's one I still struggle with personally, is asking for help, right? I think you can do everything. No, you can't. Ask for help. So, brother, we have about 4 minutes left. Any final remarks, final thoughts as we wrap up, wind down, and get ready to land the plane soon? Jean?
Yes, I love all the comments, the exercise, the diet, and sleep. It's interesting. In a therapeutic environment, we ask these questions: how are you eating? How are you sleeping? And how are you exercising, like, first? And it's interesting that those are the first things to go, right? Those are the first things that we begin to notice, that if they're off, then most likely, emotionally, you're going to be off as well. In turn, they're the things that bring about the cure. If these things don't work, that's when we have to be bold enough and courageous enough to take that next step, to look for help, because help is there. Sometimes that first step is the most difficult step. Going to the psychology today and calling someone, and we haven't talked about this, and hearing that, they're full, their caseload is full. Even on the Sabbath, I received a call today, and I'm like, listen, I can't help you now, but I can offer you a referral service for later. It happens, but you have to continue. We have to be aggressive about our mental health and our wellness. Dr. Grimes, you said something super important that I use always as an analogy. If we were in the kitchen and we were to severely cut, our fingers, we would be foolish, okay, not to get emergency care. We would be foolish. Our emotions, we can hide it a lot easier. We can put on a fake smile, like Paul Stone said. We can wear the mask. We can do a lot of different things to hide, and to get on with life. But it's dumb. We need to address it, because it will come back. To use a strong word, to haunt us, it will come back. It won't go away unless we deal with it. And the next word that we use a lot is a process. It's not, okay, well, now that I'm in therapy, everything's going to go away. It took years, and it will continue to take years. But the beauty is, for us on the therapeutic side, the beauty is the process, to see the growth. And I would just want to encourage all of you guys to take that step if you need to. If we're not here, there's others like us that are. And most importantly, God is there.
Thanks, John. Well said.
Just want to say one thing. Sleep is very important. In personal experience, the sleep that we get, we live in a very fast society. And another thing that I tell my patients or veterans who are allow me to speak about is I tell them about CPR. It's not cardiopulmonary, but it's called Christ's personal resuscitation. The Bible says in James, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get in wrath. So Ruben would always say, take a pause for the cause. So one of the things that's really important is that as Christ, you ask for help, you hold, and you breathe out self and breathe in his Holy Spirit to make a difference. So it's called CPR. I kind of made that up, but I don't know if it's research based, but it's called Christ's personal resuscitation. So exhale self and immediately. That's very, very important. So yeah.
I like it. Dr.
Permission
Grimes,
to use that.
Okay.
We
we have a question here.
Yeah, question. Yeah.
Emmanuel, we have go a few minutes over. How can a young man that feels that he was abandoned by his father during his upbringing deal with this trauma?
So I'll since it's quiet. All of us would probably say we have to probably get more information, probably talk with that individual, find out some more details about that. I don't think one answer would fit this one personal question. Everyone's experience is different. What is the relationship with this father? How is the relationship different? It spares the gamut. So I had a close relationship with my father, and that would not help. But then other people didn't have a close relationship with their father, right? Or there was in the middle. So there has to be more information being said. But what I would say, if it's this young man that you know, is to be a friend. Come next and talk and ask and be a listening ear. So we call this thing active listening, right? So listening to the person talking, having this person being able to share, and we just be quiet. We just listen and we ask the questions. But giving this individual an audience of being able to share them with no condemnation, with no judgment, and not putting our own personal views in it, but letting this person talk. And if you're not able to provide support for them, to lead to someone who can support that person. But I think the first thing to do is just listen and see where this person is going through. So,
yeah. And this person may be a good candidate for actual therapy, right?
Yeah.
We talk about abandonment, that can run deep in terms of that wound, right? And there's a whole discourse like we talked about in terms of attachment, right? In terms of styles of attachment and what happens when there's abandonment and how that person perceives him or herself, how that plays out in life and other relationships, right? But abandonment issues are often kind of deep-rooted issues that therapy and the process of therapy can be very helpful to really unpack that wound, that trauma, and the ways it's manifesting currently. But yeah, Dr. Grimes and Pastor Daniels, any final thoughts before I close this out in prayer?
I know we're wrapping things up, but I just wanted to make sure that people had a pretty clear idea of where to actually go to find therapy. We talked about psychology today. That probably is, still the gold standard as far as locating a therapist. But there's other sites. You can go to headway.com. You can go to Sondermind. You can go to therapytribe.com. There's several resources online. Timely MD if you're a student. There's several resources that you can actually go to. Even some of the bigger ones, BetterHelp. I know they do a lot of advertising. If you're actually looking to seek some treatment.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Definitely. The options, that's a beauty, right? There's plenty of options out there. So if you're seeking help, there's ways to get it. And Pastor Daniels, any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, one thing I'm on, especially in the time we reach, leaving the message.
But Pastor Daniels, hold on, we can't hear going in and out. Try it one more time.
Okay. Can you?
No, it's going out again. Not sure what happened. Okay, the headset. Well, we want to thank the audience for your comments, your questions. We also intend that this won't be the last time that we have a mental health event hosted by Men's Ministries. We're also thinking of having or planning for a men's support group in the new year, right? So it'd be opportunity for others who, not just us talking, but kind of really share and kind of open up about, what you're going through, how to get support, how to get some help, and just strengthening and helping each other along the journey of life. Pastor Daniels is back. Let's see if we can get that last thought. No. Sorry. Maybe next time we'll kind of get all the bugs and kinks out. But yeah, we're at time, so we definitely want to honor people's time. So thank all the panelists. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, audience, for participating with us. Thank you, brothers, for your time and sharing your resources and being vulnerable and transparent. I think these kind of conversations help others to say, hey, if they can do it, if they're getting help, hey, maybe I should look into that or get some help too. So I'm going to close this out. So let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for the healing power that you have. We thank you that you use others to help us and use us to help others. And we're all connected to the human family by your love and by your grace. So we thank you that healing is possible, no matter what types of trauma or abandonment or hurt there is. But give us the courage and give those the courage who are maybe still struggling or doubting whether they should reach out for help or get help, that they can get the help as well. Bless us throughout this week coming up. Keep us, guide us, and protect us by your love and grace. In Jesus' name, amen. Take care. Peace and blessings.
All right.
Thank you, Ruben.
It was nice.
Oh, you're welcome.
Guys, take
Thank you,
care.
Brother Ruben.
You're welcome. Thank you, brothers. Peace.